Morning, everybody.
Hello.
Mitch and I here to bring this video to you that is going to attempt to explain our teacher evaluation process that our district task force has taken a look at and are setting up for all of us to use next year. Also,
And we're going to try to do it in a flipped way using a new app we purchased for about $2.99 on the iTunes store called Explain Everything. We thought we could do it a little easier this way rather than having to have us stand in front of all of you this morning. So a little flipped instruction and some teacher evaluation.
coming at you.
Here we go.
Now that the students are gone, would you like to talk about your summative evaluation?
Principal Mathers. You weren't even in here during class.
Sure I was.
You walked in while the students were leaving.
Of course I did.
That doesn't even make any sense. Fine. What ideas do you have to help me be a better teacher?
Why would I tell you that?
Isn't that what evaluations are for?
Sweet Nelly, no. If I told you what was on my mind, there would be no point in you trying to read it. Because I hate awkward pauses, I will tell you. My first criticism would be to lose the shoes.
Excuse me?
They are open toe. Steel toe would be better.
What does that have to do with teaching?
Who said anything about teaching? This is about survival.
What are you trying to survive?
Children scare me. As they left through your classroom door, all I saw were 27 angry clowns getting out of a clown car.
I have a better chance of being struck in the head with a ball-peen hammer than I do getting constructive criticism from you.
Ha ha ho ho hee hee. My next piece of advice would be to lose the humor. Students do not need to laugh in school.
What pedagogical method did you use to come to the conclusion?
Piece of advice number 3, stop making up words like pedagogical. Students will just repeat them and turn them into curse words like, you are such a pedagogical. Or get the pedagogical out of my office.
Your mother must be more amazed and proud that you have made it as far as you have in your career.
If I did not know better, I would say that you are being insubordinate.
You don't know better, do you?
Not really. No.
I have an idea. Let's try this evaluation again next week. Let me know when you plan on coming in, and I will make sure you have plenty to evaluate.
But that would ruin the element of surprise. In principal school they told us that we should sneak up on unsuspecting teachers because fearing for your job is the best motivator for good classroom experiences.
Tell you what. If you show up next Tuesday, I will pretend to act surprised.
Can you pretend to be scared?
You are pushing your luck.
Fair enough. I will bring bagels and coffee.
Principal Mathers. We don't do bagels and coffee in 5th grade.
Heavens to Betsy. Then how do you get through the day?
Somehow we manage.
All right, staff, thanks for tuning in today to our little flipped instruction. Our goal today is going to be to help cover all the different pieces we have going on in our current pilot plan for teacher evaluation, and hopefully we can be a little bit more productive than the video clip you just watched. And hopefully Dave and I can look a little bit more competent than that wonderful principal gentleman we saw there. But the whole focus is going to be using the information and what we have already established here in Lewiston-Altura and making sure we have what we need to fit this legislation. So starting out, I'm going to go over the legislation piece here. As you can see, this is Subdivision 8, Development, Evaluation, and Peer Coaching for Continuing Contract Teachers. And if you look here, I highlighted just a couple parts we want to focus on to make sure we have everybody's understanding of what it is that's important that we include. And you're looking right here, starting with number 2, must establish a 3-year professional review cycle for each teacher that includes an individual growth and development plan. So what we've done is we've taken a look and set up a model that is going to be on a 3-year cycle, and that's how often as a tenured teacher you would be participating in the more involved year. And we'll get into a little bit about what it includes for the other 2 years as well. It needs to include a peer review process and the opportunity to participate in a professional learning community. Fortunately, we have both of those components already established with our PLCs. You need to have at least one summative evaluation performed by a qualified and trained evaluator, such as a school administrator. That's where I go back and say, hopefully we can be a little more effective than the gentleman we just saw. And again, it's for the focus of professional development. And that, again, is for the years that we are going to be in that cycle. For the years that you are not evaluated, so those other 2 years in the 3-year cycle, the teacher must be evaluated by a peer review. This would be when we start talking about our PLC. So that's how you'd be a part of it, and you'd be a part of a team of members that are going through that. So that was one key piece, and you can look through this whole legislation if you'd like. But like again, I just wanted to focus on a couple key areas. Coming down here now to number 7, must include an option for teachers to develop and present a portfolio demonstrating evidence of reflection and professional growth. Again, you guys are doing this on a yearly basis as part of your PLCs, and so we don't want to recreate the wheel. You know, PLCs, you're going to hear that over and over and over again. We have the ability to use what we've already been doing there. We have to include teachers' own performance assessment based on student work samples and examples of teacher work. This is an area we're just going to want to focus in and fine-tune more on what you're already doing in your PLCs, and we'll have some forms later that show you how we're attempting to do that. And it does give you the option to include things such as video or other activities for summative evaluation. And then moving on here to number 8, must use an agreed upon teacher value added assessment model. So that's the key components we really made sure we had in that 3rd year piece. And it goes for the grade levels and subject areas for which value-added data are available. That's just encouraging you to use things like your MCA assessment. Still leaves the option for us to use other things. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Establish state or local measures of student growth. Again, this is going to be different for every teacher. For those of you teaching the subjects we can use NWEAs, you have some stuff. For teachers in other areas, you're going to have to create some of those assessments. And those subject areas for which value-added data are not available as a basis for that 35% piece, that's what, like I said, where we got to get a little more creative. So those are the key components we wanted to cover in this legislation. If you want to take some time to go ahead and read through that and look into it a little bit more, please feel free to do so.
Now that we're done taking a look at what the legislation says, let's take a look at what the state has for its default model. You may have heard this referred to as the state model, but it is what would be required of all of our teachers if we, as a district, aren't able to come up with our own district plan. So taking a look at this is one page highlighting the components of the state model. So as you can see, we have 3 years of the default model, year 1, year 2, and 3. One of the things that you will need to have in your portfolio is evidence of teacher practice collected over 3 years through points of contact, self-assessment, and peer review, and optional teacher portfolio. The self-assessment and peer review would continue to be the PLC process that we're all familiar with, so action research and generating some student data. However, the 3 years of points of contacts would be somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 points of contact with your administrator, setting up these meetings to discuss your teaching and the student learning that is taking place in your classroom. And that also needs to be documented and on file at the district office. Going to the next piece, which is student engagement. Right here, evidence of student engagements collected over 3 years through an annual student survey, as well as points of contact, self-assessment, peer review, and optional teacher portfolio. So the next piece that they're adding in on the state model is a student survey of the people in your class, or of the students in your class, commenting and giving their opinions on your class and their learning. Lastly, you can see through the bottom part here, student learning and achievement on a 3-year basis, an annual rating based on value-added data, shared performance goal, and or the results of the student learning goals, collected and put into the district files. Down the right side of this document kind of shows you that it is a evaluative system, accumulating in the first part 1, the teacher practice being 45% of the overall rating, the student engagement, the data that you're collecting there, the survey data, and all other evidence making up the next 20%. And then finally, the actual value-added data that the students are able to produce is 35% of your overall 100% rating. So as you can see, you're going to end up with a ranking of some sort by the end of each of the 3 years that we go through this state default model. So now let's take a look at, if that is the state model, what is it that the school district and our task force has put together for our Lewiston-Altura proposed plan. Take it away, Mr. Schultz.
All right, well, while Dave is catching his breath after going over all those fun components of the default model from the state, I'm going to give you a little preview briefly of the system that we have set up here in Lewiston-Altura. As you can see across the top, we have track 1, track 2, and track 3. Our focus mainly is going to be on the track 2 here, because our track 1 is what we currently do with our probationary teachers. It's really not going to change very much. It's still going to have the 3 years. It's still going to have the minimum of 3 points of contact for official evaluations, plus any walkthroughs and meetings and those kind of things. It'll still have the new teacher mentor program. So really, it's the same that we've been doing in that track 1 area. So like I said, what we are going to focus on mostly here is the track 2. Just briefly before I get into that track 3, when we're talking about needs improvement, something only when needed. And this one, is going to be more specific if there's areas we need to focus on. So like I said, getting back into our track 2 here, right in the middle, again, this is that every 3-year piece that we talked about. All right, so you're part of that cycle. You're part of your PLC teams just as you would normally be, but you're also going to have a little bit added to it. And what that's mostly going to look like is your component with your administrator and some documentation about what you're doing to meet and address those areas of growth, and when you're talking about the value-added student growth piece. And again, the biggest thing we want to keep our focus on, this is a professional growth thing. This isn't time spent documenting. This isn't time spent creating paper trails. It's you being able to focus on what it takes to make you a better teacher and improve student growth. So that's going to be the main focus of our model. You don't see all the extra added components. You don't see a lot of extra added paperwork. Just an opportunity to spend some more time evaluating and working with your administrator to improve that practice.
So let's take a look at what's the components of track 1. This pretty much is the exact same process that we are currently using with all non-tenured staff members. If you are a non-tenured staff, you'll be familiar with the 4 steps that are listed here, starting at the beginning of the year by taking a self-assessment based on the Danielson 4 domains, taking a look at where you feel you are currently as a teacher, and putting that self-assessment information down. You bring that to number 2, the meeting with the administrator, review that self-assessment, set your goals, and set up when your 3 observations will be taking place throughout the year. Number 3 there, it does say that 3 observations, feedback and reflection cycles. At the end of each of those cycles, determine along with your administrator the next steps. Finally, at the end of the year, meet individually with your administrator for that end of the year summary and evaluation, and have this all completed by the April school board meeting. Again, draft 1, or track number 1, is basically the same process that we are currently using here at Lewiston-Altura. Let's go on to track 2.
Okay, thanks Dave for going over the guidelines of track 1, how we're into track 2. So this is the main piece that we want to look at, and you see right away at the beginning the piece that is consistent again is that frameworks, that self-evaluation piece, the starting point for what we want to get to. All right, then we get into our gathering information and data. This is something we want to make sure we're focusing on things like the district goals, and priorities, so something your board is working on a regular basis and established every year. Then you're talking about your trend data, and that's going to be different for every subject. And remember that. So you'll focus on what areas. If I'm a reading teacher, I've got a lot of areas already established. If I'm teaching industrial tech, I've got to have my own areas established. So this is where it's going to differ from content area to content area. Checking on your curriculum standards and using some student work samples to get those set. You're going to want to observe some students in an instructional setting, even if you don't work directly with them, and all of us sitting here are going to be in the area, or not all of us, most of us are going to be in the area of working with those students directly. PGP, I do want to point this out. You can see this right here. This will be a little bit different. Again, we already have the PLCs, and so the reason we wanted to use something like PGP is to establish a difference. That PGP is that's your cycle year, so your year of review. That's what we know, that it's going to separate what we're working on and who you're specific with. So that's just the only reason for that slight change, and it stands for, like it says right here, right? Your professional growth plan. That's what we want to be able to establish with that. It's all about focusing on professional growth and what that plan is going to be for each person. You can see in here talking about what practices could do to improve and implement in order to have greater impact on student achievement. Just gives a couple things like, hey, is it classroom instruction? Is it family involvement? Center your thinking on students first, and that's something we've done really well in our establishment of our PLCs already. If you get down here, this is nothing new. It didn't say it for me the right way, so this is our SMART goal. So again, just breaking this down for us. So specific and simple, it's measurable, attainable yet realistic, results oriented, and time bound. We've been doing SMART goals for quite a while in our PLCs. That's nothing new, and we want to stay consistent with that practice. The next part of your step, and you'll see it on your form, is going to be defining the strategies of your goal. To support that, whether it's an action research piece, which we've done so often, some peer coaching, participation, journaling, and these are just some ideas, could be many more. Another key piece is, what are those indicators to show your goal? What is it? And we're going to have a timeline for implementation, and you're going to have at least 3 times a year that you're meeting with your administrator that to cover that, to cover and understand what that is. Next, you're going to look and see here, select your PLC stuff. That's already something you're doing, and meeting with your PLCs on a regular basis. That's nothing new for what you've been doing. What you do see here is a date. What is this date here for? This is when you're going to need to have met and have everything done and into admin. This is so that we know that plan is on track for what we want it to do. All right, then it's time to get going on implementation of your plan and adjust that as needed. That adjust as needed is going to be, back to why we have that 3 times per year, in getting it going and staying on track and coming back, and as many of you have done, making adjustments to your plan in your PLCs. Nothing new there. At the completion of the time, you will meet with that PLC team and your administrator both to share where your plan is, how successful it's been. And we have in here this May 31st date. We know that sometimes, depending on your plan, that might be adjusted, but again, that's when it needs to be a final approval and get uploaded into your district file. So that's briefly an overview of our Track 2 process. All right, here we go. Here's your initial form. You're going to see this piece if you look at the second page of the packet you have today, your goals, measures, and strategies. This is your action plan for improvement. If you see here, we've got the date set on here. The point of that date is to align things and give you plenty of time to meet with both your PLC group and your administrator to get approval for this plan. You next see your district site or department that this improvement goal will support. That's going to be relatively simple, and part of the English department, math department, counseling department, whatever that case might be. Then we get into what is our professional growth goal. Based on that self-assessment results, and some of our content standards, any other relevant data, identifies opportunities for growth. Then we're going to get into something that's going to look, again, very familiar to most of you. SMART goal time. We've written plenty of those around here. Make sure it's smart, specific, I was going to say smart, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and has a time-bound component. So we've done that. We're familiar with those things. You should be nothing new for any of you. And then if we look down here, we get into what are the specific objectives of this overall goal. Break that down. What are the things we need to get done to make sure we achieve this goal? Start brainstorming and putting together what are the strategies I plan to use to reach these goals and objectives. What are the changes? What is it that I'm going to do different than what I have been doing in order to reach this? Because start compiling a list of those resources. One of the things I want to make sure people focus on, staff development piece. I think we need to make sure we're making it a priority to take advantage of those opportunities to really align with what our goals are. And then we just have a list here of things to look at. It says choose one or two that may be most beneficial, and remember the other. It's not just what's here. So think of some things that you're gonna need to do. What kind of research? What kind of workshops might I need to go to? What kind of staff development? What kind of steps am I going to need to do to help get there? Then we get into what I would call the two biggest areas on this whole form, and that would be indicators of goal achievement and the assessments used to measure student growth and achievement. This is where you're really getting into how will you know if you're achieving those results, what measurements am I going to be using, and what is the evidence to really support progress. That's what we're after here. What kind of data are we collecting? And then how do I know what kind of assessments? Some teachers it's going to be easy. I plan to use NWEA. We do it 3 times a year. It's great. MCA data is one, but it's kind of a more of a one-time shot each year. But remember, the key needs to be longitudinal. I need to show that over time. This is that 35% component that you hear about over and over from that legislation. So remember to focus on, most importantly, something that's longitudinal that I can use to measure student growth. That's what we're after. That's something we want to be able to track over time. Again, something that you're very much used to getting together with those PLC team members, having them sign in that area so that they know exactly what it is, that you've got their feedback and you can work together with them on that. And then down here, again, this is another timeline piece, making sure that these fit in line with when the PLC meetings are, and making sure that you have time to meet with your group ahead of those dates. So this is that October 15th. I believe the winter progress is sometime in February. I don't know, we'll put 15th, and this is your end of the year time here for the spring piece. So make sure that those PLC times and dates on the calendar are lined up so that you're having those conversations with your group members, and it all ends up with meeting with your administrator and having them sign off and discuss exactly what you've got. You can talk about your changes and whatever else you have there. That's that in a nutshell, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later after this presentation. All right, here you see the winter progress report. So this is that component we talked about, having something to check up in the middle of the year. We have a date set here for February 15th that we need to have that completed by, so preferably before then. This is that checkup document to see how progress is going. So looking for evidence of personal growth and student impact, a variety of ways to show that. The key, however, that we will be working on is going to be, what has worked thus far, giving those specific strategies on what's been successful, and then continuing on, what are the next steps to change the plan? What part did you meet? So giving that input, and this is where it's going to be important to have that discussion with your administrator on what might be done to improve or create the desirable results. Like Dave talked about, you may have had very good results. Your results may have been relatively poor. Regardless, what we need to be able to do is show what those are. And then if you continue to move on down, put some of the input and suggestions that you have from your team that you're working with. What are those? Jot those down here in this area. Get your team members to sign off that you've had those discussions. Shows that you've had that meeting, and setting that next meeting date for the majority of the time. That's going to be your next PLC time unless there's something else needed. You get a signature from the teacher and then have a meeting with your administrator to show that you have that all ready to go. All right, now you can see here we have our final component, our final tracking document for the whole process. Has this submission date of the 31st, and again, that's one, maybe it's adjustable depending on what you're doing. You see some similarities to the last one, your evidence of professional growth and student impact, summarizing what you've done. Then we look down here, again, what has worked thus far, as well as what are the steps or the changes in the plan. Just because we're at the end of the year doesn't mean we stop working on improvement. Then you continue to, you still have your input, suggestion, analysis of your team, having their signatures to sign off. This is where it changes a little bit for that last piece, and you're going to want to take some time right in here in this end of year summary, teacher reflection, looking back what you've done. This is also where Dave and I will add our piece, and we'll have to share that document to add in our 2 cents about what has that feedback been from our end as far as the process working with you, what have we seen accomplished, and get an opportunity to point out some of the things that we've seen you do to make an effort to continue that your professional growth. We get our signatures from our administrator, from our teacher, make a couple copies, forward those on, and now we've got a final project, and we get to upload to your file and have a finished product. Sorry, I'm not the best with writing with this piece. So that's eventually what we'll have. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Voles, what has your experience been with the task force evaluation system this year?
Well, at first I was apprehensive about participating in the task force evaluation process because you never know what you're getting into. But after seeing how it correlated with our PLCs that we've been doing for many years, it seemed to flow pretty seamlessly into that format, and we'll just replace the PLC the year that you're up for evaluation. So I don't really think it's much to worry about as your cycle and year comes up for review.
So, Ms. Schultz, what do you think of this year's teacher evaluation process?
I feel that if you have all your PLC ducks in a row at the beginning of the year and you work with your PLC group, this is a very painless process to go through. So don't be scared.
It has been a pleasure to work with I can't see, you gotta move your finger.
Oh, sorry.
Our administration on this new project.
I didn't find the evaluation process to be intimidating at all. It was nice to get the advice and some feedback on what I was doing in the classroom, and the paperwork that we had to do was really not a whole lot more than what we had to do with the PLCs. And so the whole process, I think, is going to be very a smooth transition from